Well, I wasn't very far away, actually. I was between Tower Bridge and London Bridge, and they put a roadblock in place, and I was about sort of 10 cars behind it. So, I think when you get very close to something like that, you think, gosh, it just goes to show it could happen to any of us. It's a completely random thing as far as the innocent victims are concerned. I mean, obviously, I feel the same horror that everybody else feels, but it's becoming difficult to be shocked because when we learnt last week that in fact it isn't just 3,500 people that our security services are concerned about, it's 23,000 people. I'm afraid we really have got a massive problem. And I thought for Theresa May this morning to say we'd made great progress, sorry, I don't believe it.
Tell us though, Nigel, UKIP has been the only party under the current leader, Paul Nuttall, to disagree with the suspension of electioneering, political campaigning. Why is that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, also, Theresa May said, you must all go about your normal daily lives. We must not let this attack stop our democratic process. Oh, and by the way, we're going to suspend campaigning. I mean, if ever I saw a mixed message, that was it. And I think what Paul Nuttall said this morning is absolutely right, that the very thing these people would want is for us to suspend this general election campaign. What we ought to be doing is using this time to own up to the mistakes we've made in the past, the failures of ours in the past, and to discuss a proper way forward.
But I think the spirit behind suspending the campaigning was so that the national security debate doesn't become party political. Surely that's important.
No, it has to become party political. It absolutely must be party political. Look, we've had a situation here where, and you know this better than anybody, that we have behaved, frankly, with kid gloves because of political correctness for fear of being thought to be racist or anything else. And we need to have a proper, open, frank conversation about it. And if certain political parties wish to stay in denial over this, well, that surely is something the public ought to see.
Yeah, I think that perhaps the kid gloves point is correct, but surely that's even more so an argument to say that this debate must sit above party politics. It's a national security debate. It shouldn't be politicised, precisely in the way it has been politicised by some politicians and activists who, in the name of their own political preferences, perhaps in the name of the votes that they seek to acquire from certain communities, have been too soft on this debate and have been too politically correct on that. Doesn't that just reinforce the point, Nigel, that this shouldn't be politicised?
I have to say, I thought Piers Morgan's tweet on this was very good this morning. Piers Morgan said, I will vote on Thursday for the political party which offers the best solution to this crisis. And I think what Piers said there rather sums it up. By its nature, it has to be political, and it will always be party political.
I perhaps those two things may be separate in some people's minds, party political and political. But tell us your reaction to Theresa May's 4-point plan this morning.
Well, the fact that she said enough's enough, well, she should have said that years ago. There was absolutely, no mention of the fact that she'd been the Home Secretary for 6 years. And whilst what she said about the internet and wanted to take action was good, I didn't hear anything about what's going on with radicalisation inside our prisons. I heard nothing about radicalisation inside our schools. And least of all, I heard nothing about the preachers of hate that are allowed into some of the mosques in this country. And it's worth remembering that the Manchester bomber went to the Didsbury Mosque, who had, over the last decade, had some genuine preachers of hate. So, it all sounds a little bit like shutting the door after the horse has bolted.
Well, she was Home Secretary for 6 years, so is that not just too little, too late, what she said about enough is enough?
Well, why didn't she say that back in 2010 or 11 or 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 or 16? Why have we had to wait all this time for her to actually reach that conclusion when many of us have been worried about the growth of this? Many of us have feared that these attacks would increase. And yet, we were the sort of people that were shouted down for daring to even suggest there was a problem.
Now, Nigel, I often worry that politicians find it easy to respond in concrete ways that allow them to turn to people for votes and say, this is what I did. I tangibly, stiffer, longer sentences, more people in jail, or whatever, less immigration. These are figures and facts that you can put to people and say, this is tangibly what I've done. And where they have traditionally shied away from is the ideological debate, whether from fear of naming the problem. Finally, Theresa May's named it as Islamist extremism. extremism, but she hadn't done so before and struggled to do so as Home Secretary. It took David Cameron to do so, but then, of course, she became Prime Minister. But whether it's naming the problem as Islamist extremism or indeed fostering and galvanising those voices within civil society that are seeking to challenge Islamist extremism. So in that context, do you agree, first off, that the bigger problem is the ideological challenge and not simply one of law and order? And then second off, I suppose, to the question is increasing or making stiffer sentences for people who are involved in terrorism when they want to die in the cause while they're engaged in killing the rest of us. How is that going to deter suicide bombers, which brings me squarely back to the first point, which is surely the ideological element is what we should be focused on.
No, of course. And look, where is this happening? Yes, of course, we need to have a responsible immigration policy. We need to do our best to make sure that refugees are genuine, etc. But, Majid, I said in 2014 that we have an emerging fifth column living in this country. They speak our language, they have our passports and our nationality, and yet they are being radicalised into a set of beliefs that leads them to want to kill us. And if you look at it, we've got deep segregation between the communities in many of our cities. In those areas, we see high levels of welfare dependency and poverty. We do, amongst particularly young men, increasingly see a link between violence, extremism, and the persistent use of drugs, cannabis in particular. So yes, we're not putting people in prison for a long time is dealing with the symptom and not dealing with the cause. So yes, there is a big problem here. And frankly, if people are poor, and if people are living and feeling a bit excluded, they are much more likely to be tempted by extremist ideologies.
Finally, Nigel, Trump, he's been having a go at our mayor on Twitter. What do you think of that? Do you agree with him?
Quite right too. Our mayor, of course, wanted to ban Trump from even coming to London. And I didn't hear our mayor this morning say that he would work hard, with people within the Muslim community to drive out extremist preachers. If I'd heard him say that, I'd have cheered to the rooftops. I heard none of it.
But, Nigel, all he said, surely, as well as saying he's angered by these attacks and condemns them in the harshest possible terms, all he really said was we shouldn't allow these terrorists to divide us and tear us apart as a society and as a community. What is there really to attack in that?
Yeah, fine. We hear it every single time. I think we're getting to a point where people actually want to see some action, want to see a genuine plan. Yes, it's all well and good to show sorrow and solidarity and a community coming together in grief and all of those things. But I think we're reaching the point where people need a lot more than that. And you know something? If they don't get a lot more than that, then the demands for internment will grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And I worry that if we go down that route, we will actually create many more martyrs in the process.
Right. So just for the record, you don't support those demands, do you, for internment?
I'm old enough to remember us doing this with suspected IRA terrorists in Northern Ireland and in the process breeding more.
Yeah. All right, Nigel, thank you. On that note, we'll